It is taught in a Braita. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, the attached items that are found in the mountains at the time of the conquest are considered to be in the possession of all tribes equally as spoils of war, but that which is attached, e.g. trees, are considered to be in the sole possession of that tribe that would receive the land where the tree was found. The Braita adds, and you do not have a single tribe of Israel that did not have it in its portion, at least some land in the mountains, and some in the lowland, and some in the countryside, towards the front of her countryside, the Negev. Although the term Negev usually refers to the southern part of Israel, here Rashi explains that it means farmland in the countryside. It's called Negev or parched because it consists of large open spaces exposed to the sun, and some in the valley. As is stated, turn and take your journey, and go to the hill country of the Amorites, and to all their neighbors in the Arabah, in the hill country, and in the lowland, and in the countryside, and by the seashore. Deuteronomy 1:7. And you will find similarly with regard to the Canaanites and Perizzites and the Amorites who inhabited the land before the Jews, as it is stated in the above verse, the Amorites and to all their neighbors. Apparently, the Amorites and their neighbors all had this variety of types of land in the respective territories. The Gemara discusses the next of Joshua's conditions, and the people shall have the right to relieve themselves outdoors behind a fence, even in a field that's full of saffron. Another stipulation of Joshua is that one shall have the right to relieve himself behind a fence in a field, even if the field is sown with spices, and he may use stones that he finds in the field to clean himself afterward. Rambam Sefer Nezichen Hilchot Nizkei Mammon 5.3 Torah Choshen Mishpat 274. Rav Aha bar Yaakov said, it goes without saying that one may relieve himself when necessary. The stipulation is necessary only to permit one relieving himself to take a stone out of a wall. Some explain that the stipulation is necessary because saffron is valuable and requires a sturdy wall to keep out intruders. Nevertheless, it is permitted to compromise the sturdiness of the wall by taking out stones used to use for this purpose. Rabbi Yonatan of Lunel. Others explain that the Gemara is referring to a stone lodged in the ground amongst the saffron. Despite the risk that one might uproot some saffron plants while removing the stone, it is permitted to do so in the field with which to clean himself. Rav Chisda said, and it is permitted to remove a stone from a wall for this purpose even on Shabbat. A stone that has vegetative growth on it may be taken on Shabbat for the purpose of cleaning after leaving oneself. Although in general the use of a stone is prohibited on Shabbat by rabbinic law as a form of labor of uprooting vegetation, it is permitted here due to the importance of human dignity. Shulchan Aruch or Chaim 312 3 and the Mishnah Berurah there. According to those who maintain that this is referring to taking a stone from a wall, the Gemara is saying that performing this action on Shabbat does not constitute the prohibited labor of demolishing a structure. The commentaries add that this is the halacha only if the stone is not fixed in the wall with mortar. That's an arrival. According to those who explain that the case involves taking a stone from the ground, the Gemara means that this is permitted despite the fact that stones are generally considered set aside muktzah and may not be handled on Shabbat. In this particular case, it is permitted due to the importance of human dignity. See Shabbat 81a-b. Mazuta, the pious, will take a stone in this manner on Shabbat and will place it in the wall and say to his attendant after Shabbat, go and plaster over so that it would fit securely back in the wall. The Braita further states, and they shall have the right to walk in permitted paths. King Solomon instituted an ordinance that it is permitted for travelers to traverse paths in private fields after the second rainfall in Babylonia. It is prohibited to use such paths after dew has fallen. From Sefer Nezichen Hilchot Nizkei Mammon 5.4 Choshen Mishpat 274. Those paths that cut through a private field throughout the summer until the second rainfall, when crops begin to sprout. Rav Papa said, and with regard to these fields that we have in Babylonia, even dew that settled on the previous night is bad for them. Rav Papa is referring to the fields of Babylonia. The ground in that country is often damp due to flat terrain and a large concentration of water there. With the further dampness of the dew, the soil becomes especially wet, and anyone who walked on it would leave significant depressions in the ground, which would interfere with the growth of the crops there. The ground in Eretz Yisrael The content is usually dry, and therefore in the absence of regular rainfall, walking on does not leave deep imprints. Even after a night of dew, the field is sufficiently moistened that trampling on it will cause damage, and therefore this condition does not apply if there was dew the previous night. The next item on the list of conditions is, and they shall have the right to veer off to the side of the roads. What does that mean? King Solomon instituted an ordinance that is permitted for travelers pass in private fields until the second rainfall in Babylonia. They were to use such paths after the dew has fallen. From the Sefer Nezichon, Hechanizki Mammon 5:4, Choshen Mishpat 274. The private property because of the hard protrusion of the road. Well, later, Rav Shmuel and Rav Yehuda, who lived in Babylonia, were once walking along the road. Shmuel veered off to the sides of the road onto private property. Rav Yehuda said to him, "Do the conditions that Joshua stipulated apply even in Babylonia?" Shmuel said to him, "Indeed so, as I say, that they apply even outside of Eretz Yisrael." Joshua stipulates that when there is mud or dishes filled with water or in the public thoroughfare, it is permitted for travelers to veer off the road and walk on its sides, despite the fact that this land is private property. Some commentaries maintain that this is permitted even if the sides of the road are sown with crops. And Sefer Nezichon Hechanizki Mammon 5:3 Torah Choshen Mishpat 274. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and Rabbi Chia were once walking along the road, and they veered off to the side of the road. Rabbi Yehuda ben Kenosa, also known as Rabbi Yehuda ben Nakosa, Rabbi Yehuda ben Kenosa was a Tana from the last generation of Tanaim. He was apparently a younger contemporary of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, from whom he studied Torah, like many others of that period. He also received and transmitted statements of other sages from the preceding generation. Rabbi Yehuda ben Nakosa is cited in several places in both the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud. It is related that he successfully engaged in debates with heretics, was taking broad steps on the road to avoid the protrusions without going off to the side of the road or walking in front of them. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said to Rabbi Chia, "Who is this man who is showing off his supposed greatness in our presence?" And commentators write that one should not act in an overly stringent manner in the presence of his master. The reason is that this belittles his master, who acts less stringently, as implies that he is less righteous than his disciples, as the Meiri. Acting more stringently than required by halacha, he is displaying insolence. Rabbi Chia said to Rabbi Yehuda, "How is my student Rabbi Yehuda ben Kenosa? And if so, all of his actions are undertaken for the sake of heaven. He is not acting out of haughtiness." When they reached him and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi saw him, he said to him, "If you were not Rabbi Yehuda ben Kenosa, I would have cut off your legs with iron shears. I would have excommunicated you for your impudence." We have come to explain that this is a figure of speech referring to excommunication. Since an excommunicated person is not permitted to interact with other people, as though his feet have been cut off. Alternatively, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is saying that he would have presented so many questions of refutation to Rabbi Yehuda ben Kenosa that he would have been unable to stand, says the Orach. This is similar to the English expression, "you have no leg to stand on." Let's interpret the phrase literally, see Orach. The commentaries write that the conclusion to be drawn from this incident is that one should not adopt the halachic stringency in the presence of a person who is superior to oneself in Torah knowledge, when that person does not follow the stringency himself, says the Meiri. The Bava further teaches, and one who becomes lost among the vineyards one of Joshua's ordinances was that anyone who is lost in a vineyard shall have the right to cut down branches until he finds his way out. Commentators add that he must reimburse the owner of the vineyard for any loss incurred. Ram Sefer Nezichon Hechanizki Mammon 5:3 Torah Choshen Mishpat 274 shall have the right to cut down Mefaseg, cut down, from the root pei samach gimel, which is related to the meaning of the root pei samach kof, meaning to open up or to spread apart. In this context, it means that one separates the vine branches that block his way, and doing so, one is likely to break some of them or spoil the arrangement of the vines. Branches and enter an area of the vineyard, or cut down branches and exit an area of the vineyard until he finds his way back to the road. The sages taught in the Bava, and the stipulation extends further. With regard to one who sees another person lost among the vineyards, he may cut down branches and enter an area of the vineyard, or cut down branches and exit an area of the vineyard until he reaches him and brings him back up to the city on to the road. And similarly, if he himself is the one who is lost among the vineyards, he may cut down branches and enter an area of the vineyard, or cut down branches and exit an area of the vineyard until he comes back up to the city or to the road. The Gemara asks a question with regard to this biter. What is the point of the clause that begins with "and similarly"? And obviously, so it is obvious that the lost individual has the right to cut down some of the branches as one who assists him to find his way out. The Gemara answers, that is taught unless you say that it is only another person who is permitted to cut down branches, as we have as having seen the lost party, he knows exactly where he is going to rescue the other and help him leave the vineyard, and that is why he may cut down branches. But with regard to the lost person himself, who does not know where he is going, one might have said that he may not cut down branches because he must go all the way back to the boundary of the vineyard. The Braita therefore teaches us that one who is lost may cut down branches in his quest to find his own way to the nearby town or road. The Gemara asks a further question: why is it necessary for Joshua to stipulate that one may find his way out in this manner? After all, this halacha applies by Torah law. When one is lost, whoever can assist him in helping him find his way must do so by Torah law, as is taught in a Braita. There is a mitzvah to return lost items to the owner. From where is it derived that the requirement applies even to returning his body? Hashavas Gufo. If one sees another in a situation of danger, he must rescue him or hire others to save him. If he neglects to do so, he has violated the injunction of the verse, Leviticus 19:16. Neither shall you stand idly by the blood of your neighbor, as well as the verse, Deuteronomy 22:2, and you shall restore it to him. 114, 426:1, and the Shema there. Are you helping a last person find his way? The verse states, you shall restore it to him. Deuteronomy 22:2, which can also be translated as, you shall restore himself to him. And if this is required by Torah law, why did Joshua stipulate a condition to this effect? The Gemara answers, by Torah law, one is required only to walk in a roundabout path along the boundaries, without damaging another's vine by cutting off branches. Joshua came and instituted stipulation, one may go even further and cut off branches and ascend, or cut off branches and descend, thereby leaving through the most direct route. The Gemara addresses the stipulation in the last Braita, and that a corpse with no one to bury it, a mace mitzvah, acquires its place. Joshua introduced a stipulation that a corpse found anywhere acquires its place, i.e. it should be buried where it was found, even in the field of saffron. If a corpse is lying on a boundary or in a place where it would impart impurity to the public traversing there, it should be buried on the side of the road. If it was found between a fallow field and a ploughed field, it is buried in the fallow field. If it was between a ploughed field and a sown field, it is buried in a ploughed field. If the field on both sides of the road was similar, one should bury it in the one closer to where the corpse was found. The commentators note that nowadays, when there is concern that a grave in an open field will be treated with disrespect, it is proper to remove the corpse for burial in a cemetery. Rama Sefer Nezichen, Hilchot Nizkei Mammon 5:3, and Sefer Tahara, Hilchot Tumas Meis 8:7, Shulchan Aruch Yerodea 364:3, and the Shach there. And is buried where it is found. The Gemara is a contradiction from a Braita. One who finds a corpse laid out on a main street, and is Suratia, from the Greek strata and the Latin strata, meaning street or road, evacuate it for burial either to the right of the street or to the left of the street, but it may not be buried under the main street itself. If one can move a corpse either to a fallow field or to a ploughed field, he evacuates it to a fallow field. If the choice is between a ploughed field and a sown field, he evacuated to the ploughed field. If both fields were fallow, or if both were ploughed, or both were sown, he evacuated to any side where he wished to move it. According to this Braita, that a made mitzvah is not necessarily buried where it is found, it may be moved elsewhere. Rav Bava said, the ruling in this Braita is stated with regard to a corpse laid out on a pathway. Rashi explained that the corpse is found stretched out over the entire width of the road. It is impossible to bury the body exactly where it is found, as this would impart its impurity to all those who travel on that road. Others explain that the phrase means in the boundaries. In other words, if the corpse is found within the boundaries of a municipal area, it should be brought to a proper place of burial, e.g. a cemetery, or if none, there is none nearby to the adjacent fields, and that's from the Meiri. Were the corpse buried there, it would prohibit passage by priests. Since permission was already granted to evacuate it from there, one may evacuate it to any place he wishes. If however the corpse was in a field, it would be prohibited to move it. The Gemara returns to the opening statement of the Braita that Joshua stipulated 10 conditions. The Gemara says, are there really only 10? You continue in Braita actually 11. The Gemara answers, the condition that one may walk in permitted paths that cut through a private field in the summer was not introduced by Joshua, rather King Solomon said it. And it is taught in a Braita, if one's produce was completely harvested from the field, but he did not allow people to enter into his field to shorten their route, what do people say about him? They say, what benefit does so-and-so have by denying entry into his field? And what harm are people causing him by traversing his field? Concerning him, the verse says, do not be called wicked by refraining from being good. And we'll ask, is it really written, do not be called wicked by refraining from being good? There is no such verse in the Bible. The Gemara answers, yes, an idea like this is found in the Bible, albeit in a slightly different form, as is written like this, withhold not good from him to whom it is due, when it is in the power of your hand to do it, in Proverbs 3:27. The Gemara further questions the statement of the Braita that Joshua instituted 10 stipulations, and there is nothing more than Joshua, and is there nothing more that Joshua instituted, but there is also a stipulation mentioned by Rabbi Yehuda. As it is taught in the Braita, Rabbi Yehuda says, during the time of manure removal, a person may remove his manure. During the time of the year when people put out their manure into the public thoroughfare, it is permitted to do so, for it to be trampled on by the people and the animals that walk there. No less, one is liable for any damage caused by his manure. If another person takes the manure from there for himself, it's considered theft. I'm say from Ezekiel, Hilchot Nizkei Mammon 13:15, Hilchot Gezeilah Aveda 6:5, Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat 414:2. From his property into the public thoroughfare and pile it up there for a full 30 days, so that it should be trodden on by the feet of people and by the feet of animals, thereby improving its quality, as it was on this condition that Joshua apportioned Eretz Yisrael to the Jewish people. The Gemara continues its line of questioning, and furthermore, there are stipulations mentioned by Rabbi Shmuel, son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch, as taught in a Braita. Rabbi Shmuel, son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch, says, it is a stipulation of the court, i.e., it is an automatic right, even when not explicitly granted, that this owner of a bee colony may enter the field of another and chop off. In the case of bees from a bee colony that set up a hive on the property of another, some say that it is permitted for the owner of the bees to cut off the branch upon which the beehive is situated and reimburse the other for the loss involved. As a halacha in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel, son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch, the Torah citing the Rosh, others disagree and maintain that although it is permitted for him to enter the neighboring field to save his bee colony, it is not permitted for him to chop off the branch upon which the hive is located. Ram Sefer Nazichan, Hilchot Gezeilah Aveda 6:14, Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat 274:1, and in the comment of the Mar. The other's branch in order to save his bee colony, and afterward he gives him the value of the other's severed branch. That is, if the beekeeper finds that one of his colonies has relocated to a tree in a neighboring field, he may bring it back to his own property together with the branch, provided that he later reimburses the owner of the tree. The Braita continues, and it is also stipulation of the court that this bearer of wine pours out his wine. If one was carrying a barrel of wine and encountered a leaking barrel of honey, and he spilled out his wine to use the barrel to save the honey, the owner of the wine is not reimbursed for his loss, as he may claim only a worker's wage for the actions he performed. If the owner of the wine stipulated beforehand that the owner of the honey, or in the presence of a court, that he wishes to be paid for his wine, he is entitled to reimbursement. If the owner of the honey agrees to reimburse the owner of the wine, the latter is obligated to spill out his wine and save the honey. And is the same in any similar case, e.g. a load of wood and flax. As halacha in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan ben Baruch, Torah citing the Rosh. Others derived from the Ramah disagree with these rulings. Ramah Sefer Nazichan, Hilchot Gezeilah Aveda 12:6, Torah Choshen Mishpat 74, Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat 264:5. From his Bava, and uses the barrel to save another spinning honey, which is more valuable than the wine, and then he takes the value of his wine from the saved honey of the other as reimbursement. And it is likewise a stipulation of the court that the owner of wood unloads his wood from his donkey and loads another's flax, which is more valuable than wood. If the load of flax is stranded on the road due to a mishap, and later he takes the value of his wood from the saved flax of that other individual. Once again, the reason is that this It was on this condition that Joshua apportioned every soul to Jewish people. The Gemara explains that why the stipulation mentioned by Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shmuel are omitted by the earlier Breita. In the Breita, we are not speaking of individual opinions, but only of those that are accepted by all sages. Thank you for listening, and wish you all the best. Bye.